but he had a shield carrier to help him with carrying it. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw in battle array? Am I not the Philistine and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again, the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So note that he says up here, am I not the Philistine and you the servants of Saul? So he's representing all the Philistines, and he's saying, you guys are Saul's guys, so one of you come out and represent Saul. Is that correct? Do the people belong to Saul?
People belong to God.
But that's a standard way of thinking, isn't it? They would think Saul. But that's an important point here, because what we see Saul behaving like is on his own without God. And David's actually the opposite. He sees himself and the children of Israel as God representing God. So it's kind of a key phrase there to show the difference between them. Notice they were dismayed and greatly afraid. At the end of verse 11, dismayed and greatly afraid. So if you believe that you are going to have to go out and fight this guy, you would be dismayed and greatly afraid. But who should they have been thinking of? They're the people of God. They were supposed to get those Philistines out of the land. Why aren't they going forward and getting them out?
But why should they be any different now than they have been in the past or will be in the future?
Or like we are, where we do everything by our own strength and our own might, instead of recognizing the power of God that is within us to not only do the task, but to guide us in the task. We do the very same thing. We go out to these battles that we think are the right battles, and we stand there trying to figure out how we're going to do it, instead of being yielded and let God tell us how he wants it done, and then be that tool to do that. Now David, verse 12, was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among men. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, the second to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. The Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days to take the stand, and took his stand. So David's going back and forth. So does Saul know David?
He has met him before.
He's seen him. He's been in there playing music, but he's not there all the time.
No.
So he's kind of in and out. So we're going to see later that Saul's going to say, who is this guy?
Right.
And so the question is, why didn't he know him if he's already... Well, part of it is that he's just a kid that's coming in when Saul's having his bad headaches and playing music to soothe him and get him to, settle down. So he knows him in that scenario, but he doesn't really know him as a person. And David is still taking care of the sheep, the flock. We saw on the map that it's not that far away here. You have Jerusalem and Bethlehem. His flock was near the Bethlehem area. So they're going back and forth, and then he goes over here to the Valley of Elah to see what's going on over there. Okay, so that's where we ended last time. So, who should have accepted Goliath's challenge? Saul. Saul was the king, and what was the king appointed for? Fighting the battles. And Saul was a head taller than anybody else. He was probably he might have been more equal to the size of that Goliath. But at least he should have been the one out there. But as we see, Saul was hiding in the ranks. He was somewhere back behind everybody else. Starting at verse 17. Then Jesse said to David his son, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers. Bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000, and look into the welfare of your brothers, and bring back news of them. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. Were they fighting?
No.
40 days they've been
No,
listening
they
to
were
threats.
hunkered down.
So this would have been common in battle. How are you going to eat? You'd either have to leave the battle to get food. You bring whatever food you can, and then you eat whatever's in the land. But then after 40 days, you're going to need sustenance. So the father sends David to go take this to your brothers. They're fighting a battle. Are they fighting? No, they're sitting down waiting, listening to threats morning and evening from Goliath.
Yes, they don't know that.
Verse 20. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper, and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Ah! And then they all walk back and wait till the next time, right? Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, thus it will be done for the man who kills them. I think I skipped a part. In verse 24, when all the men saw them, they fled and from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. What's their mistake there? Is he coming to defy Israel in verse 25? He's defying the God of Israel.
Yes.
And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. So Saul is saying in verse 25, he's saying that whoever will do this, they'll be rich, they'll get his daughter for his wife, and they'll get a free house. They'll never have to pay taxes as long as they're living in Israel. They'll be free of taxes. So that's when David says, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Now, why does he say uncircumcised? Who cares? Why would he say uncircumcised Philistine?
Because that makes him lesser than the Israelites.
It makes them not godly,
Yes.
right? Because that was the sign of their covenant with God.
Right.
So he's saying this guy is not even a Christian. This
Yeah.
guy is not even a Jew. And you're allowing this to happen. That he should taunt the armies of the living God. See, David gets the insult is not to Saul or the Israelites. The insult is to their God. That's what the others are missing.
Yeah.
The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, thus it will be done for the man who kills him. So now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing. And the people answered the same thing as before. So why do we see Eliab talking this way toward David?
He's the older brother. He probably has some resentment and all that kind of stuff.
Do you think he might feel a little guilty about standing there just listening to the insults and nobody taking any action? He's a part of not taking the action.
Yeah, David is saying, well, who is this heathen over here mocking the armies of the living God?
And why aren't
Okay.
y'all doing
And
something
who's
about it?
part of that army? His
Yeah.
brothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're cowering in fear.
Right, right. So it's like a criticism, right? And
Yeah.
they've offered this big reward, but nobody's taking it up. The reward being that you don't have to pay taxes for a year, and you get to marry the daughter of the king, all that stuff. Yeah, nobody's stepping up. And the difference being that David sees the insult to God, not to the Israelites or to Saul. That's the difference, and between what he's thinking and what the others are thinking. So what are they thinking then? If you were in that crowd and a little kid like a David came up and started saying, you, for Southern Baptist Church, you're God's people. You should be doing something for God about this or that. What would we say?
Go with grace.
Well, we pay a pastor. Let the pastor do it. It's a little scary. We might get in trouble if we're going to make all kinds of excuses unless we recognize it to be God's work. That would be what would be motivating to us, right? To know and to be convinced that whatever this person was bringing up was something that God would want to have done. That should be motivating to us. So do we have the boldness to actually carry it out? Even when we know it's God's work, would we choose? That's what David is confused by. Why aren't you going and doing this? This is against God. You should be up doing something about this. And what are they saying? Oh, well, it's the king. Where's the king, by the way? You know, right? They're focusing on themselves and on their leader, their people that are supposed to be in leadership. Verse 31. When the words of which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to go to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Notice David stays right on focus. Yeah. These are not your armies, Saul. These are the living God. Yeah. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul, good luck with that. Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So let's take a look at the weapons that he's going to carry. David has no problem with this battle because he understands that David plus God equals victory. David, it's not David equals victory for God. No, he knows that there you go.
Okay.
I think we got a few napkins.
Is there a roll of paper towels in here anywhere?
I don't think so, but I think there's some napkins over there.
There are some napkins. What a mess.
That's all right. You
Sorry,
can look
guys.
under the cupboard there. I don't know if there's any paper towels under there. No?
Not yet.
No?
Marv, it was just getting good.
Yeah.
I can go get some from the bathroom.
Yeah, I can use a few of these. It won't
Okay.
take much.
Yeah, there's not much there, but yeah, napkins will be good. Sorry about that. Towel? Yeah, there you go.
Oh, you got a towel?
There you go.
Well, that'll probably finish it up if you start it with this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. No big deal.
It's not like you did it on purpose.
Oh. there by your left knee, there's a little splatters I can see
Oh,
listing.
yeah.
And then if you can just hand it over.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Did I get it?
Over closer to the chair, still right
Right
there.
here?
There's some spots, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, why don't you?
Right there.
Here, let's see, there's some over here.
Okay.
It's scattered out.
Boy, it really splattered, didn't it?
It did it.
Yeah.
Over by your right knee there. There you go. Got it. There you go.
I think that's most of it.
Looks like new.
Yeah, can you get up?
Yeah, good luck.
I'm not that feeble yet.
We'll watch you.
Let me see, there's a little bit right over here.
Oh, it's up here.
You got it?
Did you see another place?
Yeah, I'll get it with your napkin.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Now, what should I do with the towel here?
I just-
take it and
I-
wash it.
Oh,
Okay.
thank
Thanks.
That's fine.
you.
Okay, so in this section then, we see that David's confidence is in God, not in himself. That's the key difference between the others that are there. They're seeing their strength as being in themselves, not that their strength is in God. He says in verse 37, and David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion. He wasn't saying, I did such a big thing with this lion and the bear, but the Lord delivered me from those. So,
Just faith in God.
right. Go and may the Lord be with you. Saul himself has been hiding. And he's supposed to be the king. He's supposed to be the one who's out there fighting, but instead he is putting David out there. David has the confidence because of his faith in God. And Saul does not have the confidence because he does not have the faith in God. He doesn't do things the way that God tells him to do things, and then they don't work out well. So,
Well, and this God's spirit that he was once blessed with and guided by has been pulled away from him
That's
because
right.
of his disobedience.
yes. And
Yeah.
he had failures.
Yeah.
So he wasn't real confident. Remember when they first pulled Saul in, he was hiding in the baggage area and they had to go find him. So he's lacked confidence from the beginning, mainly because he keeps having the confidence in himself instead of doing what God tells him to do. Now, is that like us?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We often pass up opportunities because we don't feel confident in our ability to convince someone or to say something properly. Meanwhile, the spirit inside of us is saying, say it, say it, say it. Or the spirit is inside of us saying, shh, shh, don't say it. Right?
Mhm.
That Holy Spirit is supposed to be governing us, and we respond to that, then we know we're doing God's work. Instead, we focus on ourselves, that we're going to be embarrassed, they're not going to like it, whatever. We focus on what we think the reaction will be, when we need to be more like David and focusing on what it is that God wants us to do. And we have the Holy Spirit inside of us to prompt us one way or another. Now, I want to talk to you about his tools here. He says that he took a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 small, smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag. So this was normal equipment for a sheep herder.
Mm-hmm.
They would have a stick for, you can imagine all the things you use a good stick for when you're out in the country. Even when I go walking, I carry a good stick with me out in the desert.
Yeah.
You could use it for a snake, you could use it to whatever. You need a good stick.
If you need something
Stability.
to ward off a dog, you got something.
Or stabilize yourself when you're
Yeah.
coming up a hill, whatever. You
Yeah.
need a good stick. So he's got a stick in his hand, and then he has 5 smooth stones. These stones were not stones like this. These were stones the size of a baseball or larger, like this big. They wouldn't.
Put it in your hand type.
Yeah, well, because he's going to put it in a sling, not a slingshot,
Yeah.
not a forked thing that you go like this with. He's going to put it in a sling, which is like a piece of leather or cloth that is, like a band. He would hold it on one end, and you would sling it and let go of one end. And that one end then the rock would fly then from that sling. He was a slinger. Now the Bethlehemites, they were Benjamites. They were notorious as slingers. One more detail though. What was the other detail? Left-handed slinger. So Eve, if you have, is that your hurt arm on your right side? So if that's your shield, and you take your other arm, you've got your sword. And if I'm a slinger, and I'm going to sling with my left hand, which is over here, it crosses.
Yes.
So what happens is I have an advantage to her protecting herself with her right arm, and I'm slinging with my left arm. I'm slinging on the side that's going to be the sword side, and the sword side isn't going to help. Oh, it'll be the opposite. I'm slinging on the side of the shield side. So you've got to look around the shield, bam, and that's when you get knocked in the head. So that thing, the facing one another with the right arm and the left shield and then the rock and all, it ends up making this angle where they were exceptional warriors. So that's what's happening here with Goliath. They're coming to meet, and then David doesn't like walk up and go like this. To get the momentum going, this was the practice. They would run like great leaps, take big leaping, run, and then leap, 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 and swing that sling like that, swing it this way. And that would then cast the stone into the person or whatever you're trying to shoot at. And they were so good at it. You remember in the other story we read about the Benjamites and how they were renowned for their warfare using this slinging technique. There's a movie, and the Brad Pitt plays Achilles, and
Thor.
huh?
Is it the movie Thor?
I don't.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a different one.
Yeah,
It's a different
it's
one.
like
yeah.
set in.
I remember.
It's
the movie,
it's a
though.
story of Achilles and the other characters at that. I can't. Anyway, but there's a battle they have with the king, and if I remember right, he does that. Where he kind of does like this running leap, and he's using a sword, and they're coming at one another with this momentum, like a crash boom kind of thing. So here you've got big old honking Goliath with all of his 125 pounds of armor, and this little waif of a shepherd's boy is going to whoop him because he's agile and gets that momentum going with the sling, and slings a rock this big and hits him in the head. So it's a different thing than what we sometimes imagine.
I think it's called Troy.
Troy, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's in that one. I have this memory of seeing Brad Pitt in one of those things and him flying through the air like that. When I read this,
I think near the opening sequence of the movie shows him in battle like that.
Does
and
it?
He's taking on some much bigger guy, and he comes running up to him and just kind of flies by him and slices down into his neck as he's going by.
Something like that. I just remember the whole, and when I read this, I'm going, oh, I remember, like I could see Brad Pitt in that army outfit. I mean, of long ago.
What a vision.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Anyway, so he's got what he needs to take care of that Philistine, and he's used it before with a lion and a bear. But what does David himself say? He says that God is with me. He is God. This is God's battle, and I'm going to fight God's battle, and you can't let this guy be saying this kind of stuff about God. So that's where his strength is at.
Yeah, it says on here the Philistines were in fact challenging the Lord.
They were.
By confronting the Lord's people.
And that was common for them to say, whatever gods you have, they would say whatever their enemies' gods were, and they'd say all kinds of vile things, like insulting things. Well, you're a god, blah blah blah. Like they'd yell, insults back and forth. Mm-hmm. Verse 41. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. So you've got the Philistine plus a shield bearer that David's going to get by. But again, you've got this technique, which is one that they're not counting on. Verse 42. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. There's the statement of faith right there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Notice how many times he says, in the name of the Lord, our God, the Lord will deliver. The Lord does not deliver by sword or spear, but the Lord will give you into our hands. There is a God in Israel. That confidence that he has is in God, not in himself. Oh, but if we could only do that. We act so afraid of the strangest things. We act like, oh, I don't want to have that conversation. They might get mad at me. The Spirit prompts us to speak up, and we don't, because we're somehow nervous or afraid of the context. The Spirit tells us to shut up, but we speak anyway. I mean, it goes both ways, right? Sometimes the Spirit might guide us to be quiet, and other times to step up. Either way, if we will recognize the battle as God's battle, we'll have the wisdom for that situation. It's God knows what he once said. You may not know why you're being prompted to speak to that stranger on a bus ride, but you'll just feel that prompting, that urging. Ask them about their ring or whatever it is. So if you'll respond to that prompting or urging, God may lead that conversation a place he needs for it to go. On the other hand, there's sometimes with some people, I felt certain I was not supposed to say a word. I wanted to. There were things I had to say to them, but I felt the strong sense that no, not your place, not your time. God knows what the best time and place is, if we would just yield to him and do it in his time and place.
Well, God did that to me this past week.
Really? Which way? Make you speak or tell you not to?
He made me speak. And I had a caregiver that came in, and I really didn't have a lot for her to do except one thing. And so we got done with that. I said, well, maybe you can help me with some filing that I've got to do. I can't handle these big boxes, and I'm going to transfer, blah, blah, blah. So I said, I'll write the name of what I want on the file folder, and then you can start putting them in alphabetical order for me. And they were possible studies, biblical studies, that I'm considering. So every time I find one, I just print it out and I just threw it in a box, and now I'm going to organize them. So we go through John and Joshua, and I had about 12 or 15 files. So she's got those all organized, and she said, well, what are you going to do with these? So, well, I'm not sure. They're, studies that I can possibly do with my study group or whatever. And so every time we did something, that woman came up with a question.
Okay.
And I had to answer it.
Uh-huh.
And it was just like, oh, and then like, well, so you do studies? Yes, okay. And yeah, we have a small group and I lead them and so forth and so on. And then these other ones are classes that I have attended with somebody else, blah, blah, blah. And she's, well, what's your favorite study that you've done?
Oh my goodness.
What's the one that you didn't feel so good about? It's
Interesting.
And you're not getting your files sorted.
well, we did. We got all
Was that
stuff.
what was competing in your mind? Or
No,
were you thankful for it? Did it feel good to share with her, or did it feel?
Yes, and I was very thankful that God prompted her with the questions.
Oh, right.
Because, it's like we've discussed in my study group many times, how we need to be prepared when people have questions for us.
Right.
And, but that wasn't the type of question that I was
You weren't ready
thinking
for that
about.
one.
So God was helping me to share part of my faith with her through these, whatever kind of questions that she wanted. They were curious. She was curious.
You have no idea how God is going to use that. It could be that he's prompting her to study more or to renew her
To look
faith,
up.
or to look up, or to
Something, yeah.
curious again about. You never know.
Yeah.
But then that's how you serve. You put it out there and you let him do what he needs to do.
Yeah.
It's his work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that type of thing can happen just watching the movie.
Mhm.
You know, where the Holy Spirit prompts you when you think, well, I've never, me growing up in a Catholic church, we never did the, for thine is the kingdom, the power,
Yeah.
the glory. Never. So it was like listening to the apostles, you know, all reciting the Lord's Prayer all the time, and I never heard it in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, where did that come up? You know, first time I ever heard it was in a Baptist church. And so I, you know, felt prompted after watching all 3 series to look it up, what the history was on that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just the Holy Spirit in you. Well, you don't know about it, so why don't you look it up?
Right.
Why is it, you know?
Right.
So, I
Right.
think that's,
Because God is building our faith,
Mhm.
but he's also building faith in other people. So we can trust him. It's his work. It's
Yep.
his battle. But we're a part of it. We just need to be of service. Be willing to be of service,
and then listen too.
whether it's growing us or growing someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 48, then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Now you might ask, why did David have 5 stones? Well, we don't know, except that you probably need another one in case the first one you send doesn't go. But some say that because in 2 Samuel 21 to 22, we read that Goliath has 4 sons. We're not really sure if they're 4 sons or 4 brothers, but they believe they were 4 sons. And so it could be that when Goliath steps forward to make this charge, it could be his 4 sons were right behind him. You don't know. We don't know that. But we do know that David chose 5 stones. So you got to wonder, I wonder why 5.
Well,
So.
take a loaded clip.
Yeah. Yeah, but that'd be awfully heavy in your, that'd be a size of baseballs would be heavy stones to carry in your pouch.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a good reason for it. So, okay, verse 50. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. I guess he could beat him with a stick. I don't know. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took a sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it.
Where did the shield bearer go?
Yeah, I know. That's exactly what I was going to say, Marvin. The shield bearer seems to be nowhere.
Yeah.
Maybe when Goliath fell, that was the end of the shield bearer. He left. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and the gates of Ekron. And the slain Philistines lay along the way to Shaaraim, even to Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. Then David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now that's a confusing thing because Jerusalem doesn't really exist as Jerusalem yet. Later, when David makes Jerusalem the capital city, he probably brought the head of the Philistines with him. So most scholars believe that this is kind of like they're telling the story from a time in the future when they know David is going to be in Jerusalem. So they're telling this story about writing down the story that happened, and then they say, the head that he took to Jerusalem, the one that's in Jerusalem now, that kind of thing. So,
Oh, yeah.
you know what I mean? To us, we're reading like, oh, he went over and put it in Jerusalem. No, it's probably that it says then David. It probably means that later when there is Jerusalem and he probably had that head with him there. Remember, you could go see it.
David was the one that made Jerusalem the capital,
Yeah.
basically the capital city.
I don't think it was even called Jerusalem at the time.
No.
And there were a couple little cities there. And so when he established that was going to be where the temple was going to be and all that, that made it the city, the main city. So that's why we think this phrase is probably meaning that from the time they're telling the story, looking back, say, see, that's why that head's in Jerusalem, because he took it there with him. Verse 55. notice what the Philistines do. Go
Well,
back
do we
up
know-
here.
do
Back
we
up
know
here.
where in Saul's reign, where Saul's residence was and where the tabernacle was?
Saul, he was all over the place, and the tabernacle stayed where it was supposed to be, except when they took the ark out to.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't move from where it was before. I forget the name of that city. They took it out. They took the ark out to go.
Yeah, and then.
But they weren't following the priestly duties at all. Even Samuel
No,
wasn't
and
actually a priest, a proper lineage. Everything had fallen apart. Back up in verse 52, 51. What did the Philistines do once Goliath was dead?
They ran.
What were they supposed to do? What had Goliath been saying for 40 days?
That if you kill me, we'll be your servants. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
If I kill you, you're our servants, right?
Right.
So just so you know, the Philistines didn't even go by their own thing. They just ran. Of course,
Yeah.
the Israelites then took out after them. So, verse 55. Now when Saul saw David going out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? What? Saul doesn't recognize David. Abner said, by your life, O king, I don't know. So the commander didn't have any idea. The king said, you inquire whose son the youth is. So when David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. So Saul doesn't recognize him. David was a young musician. He was probably like 15 years old. And it says here in the study Bible, I like this note here on this in the study Bible. It says that David was not a permanent resident at Saul's court. Saul's knowledge of David and his family may have been minimal. So Saul may have been so incredulous at David's courage that he was wondering if his family background and social standing might explain his extraordinary conduct. So we don't really know. He may have recognized that David was that guy that comes and plays the music for me. When he says, who is this guy's family? He may be saying, wait, I need to know more about this kid. You know, maybe he remembered. Or maybe he didn't recognize him because he was just coming and going, still caring for his flocks. We're not really sure either way. But we do think David was a young man, probably 15 years old, a kid.
And then mine also adds about the fact that maybe he wanted to know more about David's background because since he won and he was supposed to get his daughter and all these other, rewards. And who is this young man?
Yes. Find out more about him. Chapter 18. Now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. So this is a closeness that Jonathan feels toward David. What does David feel toward Jonathan? Is this mutual or one-sided?
I think it's mutual.
And it never actually says anything to make us think that David even liked Jonathan. It's a little tricky. They are kind of partners in crime as we go forward in the sense that they work together to find out information from Saul. But as we read, look carefully for anything that says that David was affectionate toward or loved Jonathan. And the reason that that's brought up is because David has already been anointed as king. Who would be the natural successor to Saul?
Well, Saul's son.
Can you
is
imagine the turmoil inside David?
Yeah.
Knowing only David and his brothers know that he's been anointed. And now this Jonathan, who he knows would be the normal heir to Saul, is being real friendly and real. And can you imagine inside David? He's not supposed to tell anyone about what happened. But there's still this. So the scholars were saying that if you look as you read the story, look for how David responded to Jonathan. You'll see very little. It seems to be a one-sided thing. Verse 2, Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. And Saul sent him over the men of war. And it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So David and Jonathan become lifelong friends, but there seems to be a barrier in the connection. David doesn't really express the same kind of affection or love, and so they wonder about if that's kind of a difficult thing. This one scholar says, this is Robert Alter. Jonathan and David made a covenant because Jonathan loved him as his very self. While the verb made is singular, a grammatical pattern that makes the first member of the subject, Jonathan, the principal agent of the action. That is, Jonathan initiates the covenant, not David. So it makes you wonder if it's because David's used to having these older brothers that are always saying, showing affection toward him, or if it's because he's uncomfortable about the whole situation. But it's not, it's kind of a one-sided thing here that's happening. He appears to be friendly, but he also appears to be guarded. Of course, maybe having older brothers, he's learned to be guarded.
There you go.
So, Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. That act is an elevation of David to a like position. That's Jonathan saying, "You're as good as I am." How awkward for David. Verse 6. It happened as they were coming when David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out of the cities singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. The women sang as they played and said, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." Then Saul became very angry, for the saying displeased him, and he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?" Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on. It's like he had the side eye, always looking out the side of his eye at David. Verse 10. Now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house while David was playing the harp with his hand as usual, and a spear was in Saul's hand. Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David escaped from his presence twice. Here's a picture of it. Now, there's I don't feel comfortable with the way this is written, where it says an evil spirit from God.
Yeah.
Why would God send an evil spirit? I don't understand that. But then when I read in the, there's several places where the same thing happens, where it says that the Spirit of the Lord departed. In Judges 16:20, the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul. And so the removal of the Spirit from Saul and the giving of the Spirit to David, that might contrast their lives. But there's several places where the Saul's disobedience and results in tormenting of evil spirits. And some scholars say that that we know that God allowed those spirits to go out. So they're saying it's like the scholar I was reading was saying that the evil spirit from God is meaning that God allowed the evil spirit to come, that he didn't make an evil spirit to him. Another scholar said that it's because in their opposition to God, because he's opposing what God's will is, he's welcoming an evil spirit. And I don't agree with either of those, because I don't see it in the writing. When I look at the Hebrew, it says an evil spirit from God. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if because Saul pulled away from God, God is sending evil spirits to, or if they consider that mood that he's in to be that he gets in this dark black mood and has headaches and stuff. Is that what the evil spirit is? I don't know.
Maybe God's hand is not on him, protecting him from the evil that's...
Well, we know that God has power over the spirits, and he allowed, like for example in Job, he allowed that to occur. So you know that he allows it. So is that the scriptural way of saying that God allowed it? Or does that saying that he actually said, "You evil spirit, go get this guy"? I don't know. I don't know.
When they go back in my study notes to 16:14. Now the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul, and they said, what was this tormenting spirit the Lord had sent? Perhaps Saul was deeply depressed, or perhaps when the Holy Spirit left Saul, God allowed an evil spirit or a demon to torment him as judgment for his disobedience.
Yeah, and then down below, it says more down there too.
Isn't it all curious that this appears to imply or even state that even after David was given his military leadership roles and going out and leading the fighting men, that he was still resuming his role as the musician?
Right, and what happened to no taxes for a year and marry his daughter and all that, right? Well, that's going to come up. So just so you know, I hear all that you're saying about that evil spirit, but honestly, I don't see a consistent answer that's consistent with all the places that is. And if you read in the study notes, it'll give you other scriptures that say it that way. So
there's a big long discussion on it.
Yeah, it might be.
Really research it.
I didn't want to get in too far into that because it looked like a long thing, and I didn't see them really coming to an answer that sounded scripturally sound. But anyway, verse 12. Now Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him. Who's the Lord with? David, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him as his commander of 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. So in other words, to give him honor, he makes him commander of thousands. But that also means that David will be out fighting battles, and maybe Saul's hoping he'll get killed in one of those battles. He'll send him on impossibly dangerous missions, hoping that he gets killed. Verse 14, David was prospering in all his ways, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he was prospering greatly, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, and he went out and came in before them. So the people respected him as a leader and a good fighter. Leaders lead, and David was at the front and leading. Verse 17. Then Saul said to David, here's my older daughter Merab. Now there you go. That was the promise, right? He can marry. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be a valiant man for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, my hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. But David said to Saul, who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be the king's son-in-law? So it came about at that time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Meholathite for a wife. So in other words, it seemed like an attractive offer, but he doesn't know this girl, and she's now that she would be Saul's spy into his life. Yeah. So he doesn't fall for that trick. Verse 20. Now Michael, I'm going to call her Michael. Some scholars use the term Michelle, but it's easier for me to remember to say Michael. Saul's daughter loved David. Now the other daughter he didn't know or love, right? But this one he loves. When they told Saul the thing was agreeable to him, Saul thought, I'll give her to him, that she may become a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David, for a second time, you may be my son-in-law today. Then Saul commanded his servants, speak to David secretly, saying, behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's servants spoke these words to David. But David said, is it trivial in your sight to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? In other words, Saul realizes that that David loves Michael, and so he's trying to make it work. Verse 24. The servants of Saul reported to him according to those words which David spoke. Saul then said, thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies. Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. When his servants told David these words, it pleased David to become the king's son-in-law. Before the days had expired, David rose up and went, and he and his men struck down 200 men among the Philistines. How many did he need?
100.
We got 200. Then David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full number, so they counted them out, that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, for a wife. Now you might think that's a little unusual, huh? Well, look at here. Here's an ancient picture. These are hands. The more common thing would be to take the right hand. And so it was not uncommon for them to require the right hand. But then people might argue and say, well, how do you know it was men? That was a bunch of women and children you brought hands for. Those aren't men's hands. So then they start saying, well, then maybe we should bring some penises.
Okay, that's kind of definitive.
And so just so you know, this is not just out of scripture. There were other people at other times. This is Ramesses III from 1217 to 1155 out of Egypt. So we see signs of the right hand thing and the penis thing. One of those things you don't teach in Sunday school.
Yeah.
When Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, then Saul was even more afraid of David. Thus Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines went out to battle, and it happened as often as they went out that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul. So his name was highly esteemed. So Saul's plan is not working. Michal loves David. David continues to succeed even with the odds against him, and his men are loyal to him. So we'll start chapter 19 next week. Yeah, it's shocking some of the stuff you can find in the Bible sometimes. But if you're going to cut something off, I don't know if I would. There was another one of the other commentators said that also they could cut off someone's hand and then you wouldn't know if they killed them. You could have just taken hands and not killed somebody. But if you take their penis in that way, I think that's pretty much it. You'd bleed pretty quick. Be done. Well, what do you think we learned from this? What did we learn from David's story so far?
Well, his true faith. I mean, his faith is all in God.
Look at all the people conniving around him.
Yeah.
His brothers, the Saul and Saul's son, and then have Jonathan be so open and wanting to be, but inside David's thinking, wait a minute, how's this going to all work out? He's offered the king's daughter, but he goes with the daughter that he's in love with and that loves him.
A thought just occurred to me that David was anointed as a young boy, and it was going to take several more years before he becomes king, and that's the time where we're assuming God's going to grow him. But when he was anointed, he must have received an awful lot. I mean, it was like the Holy Spirit was with him.
Well, God said he put the Spirit on David and took it away from Saul and sent an evil spirit to torture Saul.
Yeah, but I mean,
right at that
David
time.
is to come up and he knows all this, that the battle is the Lord's and it's the Lord's army and it's not Israel, it's God.
Yeah.
Those were all just words of wisdom that
He has a
must come with the
sincere faith, huh?
Yeah.
A sincere faith. Yeah. And Saul, who came in late, he was older when he was selected, but he didn't show any confidence at all from the beginning. And I think, in this case, we see David slow coming up. And I feel like God is preparing David, allowing him to have these experiences where his faith is tested and all of that. Unlike Saul, who just kind of came in and was king. There are some scholars who say that that was on purpose, that God knew that Saul would not work out very well, and that he allowed that so that he could bring David. That even Saul was preparation for David's coming.
Saul wasn't God's choice. He was the people's choice.
No, God chose him. God said. Yeah, and the people liked him because he was a head taller and good looking. They liked him, but there was his choice. My opinion is that Saul had every opportunity to be successful, and he didn't. He kept choosing to do things his way. He continually disobeyed and didn't stay in what God told him to do. He would change it just a little bit, And he would take, and he didn't seem to get that he needed to do it the way God said to do it. And I think, my opinion is that Saul had every opportunity, but God is being really careful with David to grow him more. He's working to grow, give him those more episodes of trying things out, growing him and making him so that he would be a better king.
Yeah.
But does he do that to us?
Oh, yeah.
Is he
does.
growing you?
Yeah.
I get in the way
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, he is, isn't he?
Mhm.
The experiences that we have in life are meant to teach us. And if we'll learn from them, we don't have to be Saul. David makes mistakes, big mistakes. Some really big mistakes he makes. This whole trick of sending David out in front of these battles, these armies of thousands, hoping he'd get killed. Did not David do that with Uriah?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, David made some big mistakes. So, but he kept coming back to God. And I think that's the lesson we need to learn, is to stick with God and what God is guiding us to do. Keep coming back to that set point.
And it goes back to what we were talking about last week in the Psalms. How David, his heartfelt pleading with God.
Yeah,
And knowing that he trusts him, and he has faith in him.
yeah.
And just
And that faith grows. It doesn't just happen by